Well, hey, friends, welcome to the Impactus podcast. I'm Dean Brenton. We are so grateful that you've joined us today. Well, is men's ministry still a thing? Is it still relevant, or do we even need it? We've been referring to this kind of topic as ministry to men, and that's more than just semantics. I believe we need a new understanding that men need ministry, not just programs, and that men are called to do ministry in their churches and communities. Well, today I'm delighted to have one of the most recognizable names in ministry to men back with us, Steve Sonderman. Steve is highly regarded as one of the pioneers of the men's ministry movement in America. He started one of the first men's ministries in the country for the growing church population at Elmbrook Church in Brookfield, Wisconsin. He's the founder of the National No Regrets Men's Ministries, and in 1994 began the annual No Regrets Men's Conference, which today draws thousands of men across the country and around the world. Steve regularly consults with churches and leaders. He's authored books on leadership and curriculum studies for men. He is a wealth of experience and such a heart and inspiration for ministry to men. Steve and his wife, Colleen, have 4 grown children. They are very proud grandparents, as you'll hear in the episode. And if you are a men's ministry leader or you would like to see ministry to men start in your church, this is a great conversation for you. Now, we want you to know that this podcast episode is brought to you by our premier conference sponsor, Deeks Insurance. They've been meeting the insurance needs of families and groups for over 30 years. You can visit their website at deeksinsurance.ca, and we're so grateful for their continuous support of our ministry. And you know, it's a privilege to be able to bring you solid biblical and practical content through these podcasts. We'd be really grateful if you'd subscribe and share our podcast and leave us a review on the platform you use, not for us, but to get more people to experience this type of content. And if you would like to consider supporting the work of this ministry and these podcasts, please head over to impactus.org/give and consider becoming a monthly partner or making a one-time donation to help us continue this vision to see every man become, grow, and live as a disciple of Jesus. Now let's get into today's episode. Well, welcome to the Impactus podcast, Steve. It is great to have you back for at least your second time on the Impactus podcast. Great to have you with us.
Oh, thank you so much, Dean. It's always good to talk with you and to be with you and to, just talk ministry to men. And literally nothing I'd rather be doing today than this. So thanks for the invitation to be a part of this.
It's always a delight to have you with us. We just love the work you're doing and the influence you've had on the church and on men's ministry. And just we're looking forward to a great conversation today. So for those who are listening today who may not know who you are or what you do, tell us a little bit about yourself and your ministry work.
Yeah, you bet. So I'm from the Milwaukee area. I live out just about 15 miles west of Milwaukee. And I've lived here my entire life. I am Midwestern through and through. That means Bucks, Packers, Brewers, and Badgers. And so, matter of fact, I just love going to games. This is a great time to go to games, and so I've been married. Colleen and I will be celebrating our 41st anniversary this November, and we have 4 adult children that are scattered all over. We have one in Boston, Nashville, Portland, Oregon, and then one here in the Milwaukee area. We have 7 grandchildren, and number 8 and 9 are both on the way. And
wow.
So they keep us busy, and we spend a lot of time traveling around, going to see them and to be with them. As far as professionally, I was a pastor for 35 years. 30 of those were in men's ministry, and that's really where I cut my teeth and learned so much just about the sort of the fundamentals, the basics of working with men. And then it was just a little over 5 years ago when I made the break from our church and to become a separate entity and became a separate nonprofit organization, No Regrets Men's Ministry. Up until that time, we were under the umbrella of the church. And so what do? We basically do 4 things. We do a yearly conference, first Saturday in February, and we host it here in Milwaukee, but then we stream it out. 140 sites this last year, 125 small groups, 45 countries. About 20,000 guys were involved in the conference this year. And the second thing we do is leadership training. We work with churches. We take a leadership team from a church, and we'll take 4 to 6 churches at a time, and we'll walk them through a 6-month cohort to train them and equip them, help them write a plan for developing a culture of men's discipleship in the local church. We provide some resources. We have a series of studies called Base Camp, 8 studies, 6 to 8 weeks in each one, really just helping a church intentionally disciple their men. And then the final thing we do is leadership. We provide some leadership resources. We have a podcast like you guys, through our website. I write a monthly article, and just trying to resource men's leaders anywhere to like you guys to more effectively minister to men today. So that's in a nutshell sort of the 4 pillars of what we're about as a ministry.
I love that. And there's so many commonalities with what we do. And it's so encouraging to listen and to learn and to see what you're doing. It's inspiring. Now, I like that perspective. And you and I were just chatting just before the call. But you come from a pastoral background as well. And so sometimes we observe it's sometimes hard to get leaders or pastors to really kind of put a focus of ministry to man or discipling their man. And why has that been such a passion for you? And why should it be a passion for churches and leaders?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's been a passion for me because of what you just said, that over 95% of churches do not have a ministry to men. And so, like you guys, I want to just come alongside the local church and help them catch a vision for what can happen when men are mobilized. And because we know that when men get it right, everyone wins. And all the statistics show us from a family perspective, from a church perspective, from a community, societal perspective, that when men begin to turn their lives around and begin to follow Jesus and start to get their relationships right, when they begin to become emotionally healthy, when they're spiritually growing, when they're kingdom mobilized, you just see a lot of good things happen. And we know, and I won't have to go into the details, but that men, we have a serious man problem in our society today, and the majority of societal ills are caused by men. And so, where did this passion come from? It came from just beginning to work with men and just seeing what would happen when a man came to Christ. And then when he was really rooted in Christ and began to understand what it's like to walk with Jesus and live in obedience to Jesus and begin to love his wife the way he's supposed to love her and to serve her and to engage with his children and then to become a person of influence. And I began to see all these things beginning to happen as I was cutting my teeth on ministry to men back in the early 90s. And literally seen thousands of men come to Christ. And I've seen, marriages reconciled, and I've seen families restored, and I've seen guys catch a vision for what God could do in their lives and become leaders in their home, church, workplace, and world. And for all these things, the list goes on and on. But that's why they should go back if they haven't listened to the leadership gathering. Kenny Luck did a fabulous job on on why ministry to men today. I mean, that was just phenomenal. I love listening to Kenny. But here's what I would say is that if a pastor would just take a little bit of time and find 3 to 5 guys in his church and just say, for the next 9 months, I'm going to build up into them. And if you just take that time, then those guys will be able to start their own groups the following year. And your church is going to be more healthy. Your church is going to start to really grow. You're going to see men come to Christ. You're going to see men mobilized to serve all over your church. Children's ministry, high school ministry, prison ministry, the assimilation ministry, the prayer ministry. I mean, you'll have guys serving everywhere. And for most pastors today, the studies show us that the number one thing they're looking for are more leaders. Well, leaders do not drop from heaven. You have to grow them here on earth, right? And so we're so often in the church, we're about leadership placement, not leadership development. And we're just taking people and just throwing them into positions to keep the machinery running. But when you truly start to spend time developing them, then they're going to get into places that's their sweet spot, and they're going to really get excited and really, bring passion and energy to the to that area of the ministry in the church. So you're going to have
Wow.
an army of people, men released to serve all over your church and all over the community. So boy, I know
Wow.
it's a short question, but I do get a little bit passionate about this and just what I've seen over the years in churches all around the world when men begin to get it right and churches take seriously the men in the church.
Yeah.
Men are the largest unreached people group in the world. And the only way we're going to reach them is if we get churches that start to catch a vision for men.
That's a great answer. I love your passion for that. And I love how you said, like, we churches are always looking for leaders,
Yeah.
but often it's leadership placement, not leadership development. And
Mhm.
so there's an opportunity for pastors and leaders to step into that space
Yeah.
and disciple and equip men to lead.
Yeah.
And that's not putting down our female
Mhm.
friends and wives
No.
and neighbors.
Right.
That's coming alongside and working together as the
Yeah.
body of Christ.
For sure.
Now you did tee it up well. So you just finished up, and this is going to air after our leadership summit, where we've had Chris Harper and Kenny Luck and yourself speak to some key issues, and that'll be available, of course, to replay on our website. But I'd like you to share a little bit what God stirred on your heart to share with the men and the leaders
Mhm.
about ministry to men, and what one particular area of multiplying men through small groups in particular.
Yeah, and Dean, this really is my hot button right now. Our theme for the year as a ministry has been multiply, and
Nice.
it comes from 2 Timothy 2:2, where Paul, speaking to his young protege, says, "Now Timothy, the things you've heard me say in the presence of others, entrust to other reliable men who will be able to teach others." And of course, there's 4 generations there, and that's multiplication. And so often in the church, we're doing church by addition. Well, when you look at that, we're not going to be able to keep up with the world and the world's population and the growth that we're seeing. And the only way that the church will be able to truly keep up is through multiplication. And Kenny in his talk, he mentioned 3 numbers. He said 3, 12, 20. And the 3 was this idea of that Jesus spent 3 years with 12 men. He was not concerned with numbers and
Mm-hmm.
just investing in a small group. And then he invested in those 12, and then he sent them out. And 20 centuries later, that's where the 20 comes in. We are still here, and our being here is proof that his methods worked. And so, really, what I'm going to be talking about, what I did talk about in the session, was what does it look like as a small group leader to move from just being a discipler of men to making disciplers. And so we're going
Mm,
to talk about that
good.
paradigm shift from making disciples to making disciple makers. And again, it's more than just semantics. It truly is a different mindset. And one of the things I talked about was developing a multiplication mindset, is to move from an addition mindset to a multiplication mindset, and to think, okay, what could happen 4 generations from now? Who would be impacted, and how am I going to do it? Well, how you lead the group will be different if you're thinking 4 generations versus 1 generation. And so I talked about this, the whole idea of one of the keys to multiplication is having an apprentice, that you have to
Mm,
always be
yeah.
looking for the next leader. And so I talked about what do you look for in that apprentice, and I'm not going to give it all away now. They can go back and they can see the whole thing right on the tape. But what do you look for in an apprentice, and then how do you train up that apprentice? The principle being the best place to train future small group leaders is in an existing healthy group. And so it's not just going to a classroom and reading a book or listening to some talks. You learn to be a small group leader in the context of a small group where you can be given some information, and then you have a place to practice it in a safe environment. And so that's how an apprentice is developed. And so we'll talk about how you identify an apprentice. We'll talk about how do you develop an apprentice, and then I also talked about this idea of how to then deploy an apprentice. How do you truly multiply groups in your church? And so there's different options for that. There's probably three main options for that, but well, I think it's best if they just listen, and then they can find the three options that I
That's right.
provided for how to multiply the group. But it's so important to do that, and we're seeing movements all over the world of multiplication, and I think for us in the West. This is a time for us to sort of take our cue from the rest of the world, and you see
Yeah.
what's going on in India and Africa and South America. It's just unbelievable, and we're sort of sheltered from that in so many ways, but lots to learn. So we're going to talk
Mm.
about building a multiplication mindset. We're going to talk about developing an apprentice. We're going to talk about prayer and how you pray. We're going to talk about how do you invest in the men that God has given you, and we talked about a lot of those type of things. So I really would encourage the guys to go back and to listen to that.
I love that. I didn't realize that that's kind of been your theme for this year, multiplication.
Yeah.
But it was a theme that really resonated for us when we thought about putting the leadership summit together to
Mm-hmm.
to take the long-term approach, not just assemble a few guys around me, but to think about how can we assemble guys for the long haul, guys who are looking for other guys who, that discipleship, multiplication. And so I think here in the West, we get comfortable with either status quo, plateau, or decline.
Mm-hmm.
And the gospel or the New Testament church is always about, it's always about multiplication. It's about how do we disciple people who can be disciplers.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm excited about, what you've shared at the summit and the other speakers as well. And it is really our heartbeat that we would see that happen in our communities, in our countries, and literally around the world.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'd like to just jump there for a moment, the world piece, because you've done some significant travel in recent months, and
Mm-hmm.
you've seen that up close and personal.
Yeah.
Any stories or anything you'd like to, that have inspired you about what you've seen God do around the world when it comes to ministry to men?
Yeah, it's been a real privilege for me. I don't take it lightly to be able to have been to a lot of countries like the last couple of years. And I could we're doing a lot of work in India, a ton of work in India. I've been there and just was there this last year again, and so what we're doing is there are literally now they have we're working with a ministry there. And what they're doing is they're identifying a champion in every state. So all 29 states, then Nepal is number 30. And so they have a champion, they have a national director, they developed a national team or board now for ministry to men. And what we're doing is their goal is to train 1,000 pastors to be disciple
Wow.
makers and by the end of this year. And then to have 3,000 by the end of next year. And so what we're doing live on the ground, we did 5 no regrets conferences last year or this year, back in April. We did, it seems like last year, it was just this April. We did 5 conferences, 5 cities.
Wow.
We did the conference on one day. They take what we do, that one day template, they do it. Then the next day or two, we had pastors come together for training on how do you minister to men. And so it was almost 15 days, 5 cities in 15 days, 2 to 3 days in a city. It was absolutely grueling, just brutal. But I mean, I was happy as a clam doing what I was doing, and so they do the vision that these guys have is just phenomenal. And then I went over to Kenya. And I met with 8 different churches in 2 days, 4 each. And I go to the first guy, and a pastor of a large church. He says, "Steve, this is unbelievable." He says, "I was thinking I need to do something with my men. God's been stirring my heart." And so he said, "Last month, on Sunday morning, I just announced, hey, if anyone wants to come tonight to this gathering, we're going to have it in our church." Well, he had a number of campuses. They had 3,000 men show up. And he says, we spent 3 hours just praying. And he said, I didn't even do a talk. We just worshiped and we prayed. And so we're going to do it quarterly now. We're calling it the altar. after Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, where it says, offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable to God. And he says, so what we're doing is we want guys just to offer themselves to God. And then I go to the next church, and the guy says, this is unbelievable. He says, I'm not sure what we're doing, but he said, I just sensed God wanting to do something with the men. So I called for meetings on 4 Sunday nights in a row. The first time we had 300 guys, then we had 500 guys, and this was on a Saturday morning. He says, the next one's tomorrow night. Would you come and speak at it? I said, sure, I'd love to do that. Well, then they had 700 guys, and it was just 3 hours of singing and worship and of prayer, and then I spoke on living like a champion, and it was just like, it was electric. And everywhere we went, it's like, for you can identify with this, you'll know this. And for some of the older guys, what happened in the 90s in the US and Canada with PK and Impactus is
Mhm.
what's happening in sub-Saharan Africa right now. There is
Wow.
just this hunger, this desire that God is just stirring something like I've not seen since that time. And so for us to come alongside the churches there and provide training and and things like that. So first Tuesday in October, I'm starting a 5-week virtual training with 8 churches in Nairobi, and they're bringing 6 to 10 leaders each, and I'm going to walk them through our Disciple Maker 101, impacting your world for Christ. And so we're just going to do that virtually. And then in February, I'm going live, and we're going to all come together, and I'm going to launch our 201, which is developing a disciple making movement in your church. We're going to start that live with the churches in February. And then we're going down to India in April, and we're going to do training in 4 different quadrants of the country where all those state champions are going to bring their guys. And, it's just, I could just go on and on. It's just
Wow.
unbelievable. And it's like, that old Henry Blackaby principle. You look for where God is working and you join him. That's all we're doing. We have no interest just to plant the no regrets flag anywhere. That's not what we're about. Just like you guys, it's just we're going to just quietly come alongside the church and just serve them and just help them to do what God's called them to do. And but it's all about developing that culture of discipleship for men. And I'll touch on that a little bit. Not that I will. I did touch on that a little bit in my talk as well. How do you build culture in a church? Because that's so important.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
important.
yeah. Man, that is so exciting, encouraging. I love how you frame that as well. That the '90s of the PK movements, and
Mm-hmm.
how we saw God move in the hearts of so many men in
Mm-hmm.
so many different ways and areas. It's actually still happening. Just we don't
Mm-hmm.
see it as much. What do you think we as leaders of men and pastors, and what can we learn from what God is doing today
Mm.
in the hearts of men and other places in the world?
Dean, I think there's a couple things. I think I'll just mention 2. One
Yep.
is prayer.
Hmm.
In most of these parts of the world, like when I'm in India, most of these guys, a lot of them don't even have a Bible. They're being persecuted. They most of them just don't even have a high school degree, and they are so dependent on God through prayer, and they truly realize that it's not going to be through a nicer program or a slicker flyer or a better website. They don't have any of that stuff. All they have is their faith in God, and they're just going city to city, church to church, and they're talking about Jesus. But they're truly people of prayer. They have just put me to shame. Not verbally, they haven't, but just their prayer lives. I mean, just watching them and their
Yeah.
dependence. And I think that so I think that's one thing, and that's something we can do. All the great movements of God have started in prayer.
Hmm.
And so I think as a leader to say, okay, we talk about it, we sing about it, but am I really on my knees?
Yeah.
Am I trying to move this thing forward on my knees? That'd be one thing. I think another big thing, this is something I mentioned in my talk, is they're moving from knowledge-based discipleship to obedience-based discipleship. So we have lots of courses, lots of seminars, lots of books and education, and we have just so much information. And they don't operate that way. They study something, and it's not about learning more; it's about being obedient more. And so it's all obedience based. So that when they get together in their small group, it's not, hey, what did you learn this week? No, what did you do this week? So when
Mm.
we teach them the basic Bible discovery method. That's what we teach everywhere. And that is what's being used around the world. And the Bible discovery method is developed with obedience in mind. And so in a Bible discovery method, you just ask 5 basic questions. You ask, what has been a victory, a blessing this week? And then you go with what's a challenge or a stress that you're facing this coming week that we can pray for. And then you open up your text and you ask 3 questions. What do we learn about God from this passage? What do we learn about mankind from this passage? And what's the application? And everyone ends with an I will statement. I will do this. And then when you come together next week, what did you do?
Mm.
How did it go? And it's as simple as that. They don't have study guides. They don't have books. They just take the scriptures and they ask 5 questions. Anyone can do this, and maybe another time we can spend more time on that. But the Bible discovery method, it's all we're teaching overseas. It's all I'm teaching here too for small groups because it's so simple. Anyone can do it. Anyone can do it. It's so simple.
Wow.
These are
That's
a couple of
amazing. Yeah. Well, those I think are, you're right. Like we have so much knowledge, so much resource, so much technology at us that I think we forget some of the foundational things that got us here in the first place. Number 1, prayer. Number 2, practicing our faith like that, actually living it out day by day. And I think if we could reclaim those things or rekindle those things,
Mhm.
maybe we'd see a move of God in our hearts and the
Mhm.
lives of the men around us again.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
it, it excites me and agrees me on the other hand when I look at our culture and our context as we head toward election seasons and things like that. And I look at the need of discipleship and living out our faith in a
Mhm.
real genuine authentic way. Like, and I know discipleship's been really like probably the thing that has driven you for years to just
Yeah.
into ministry. What do you say into our culture about the importance of being discipled and to be disciple makers that can make a difference in the crazy world we live in, so much polarization and anger and frustration? What does discipleship have to do with all of that for men?
So is this another podcast, or do you want to do this one first?
I don't know. I'm just winging it today.
Oh, you're doing a great job of winging it. Yeah, it is. I think it was Greg Ogden that said we need to have a big enough vision to think small. And everyone's hoping that at least in our country that they're so concerned about who's in the White House. And I say, don't be so concerned about who's in the White House. Be concerned about who's in your house.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
as someone said, where does change start? Change starts with me. And you just draw a circle around your 2 feet and say, this is where I'm going to start. And is my faith real? And am I walking with Jesus? Am I staying connected to the vine? Am I living my life for Him? And just as leaders, just to modeling is the greatest form of communication there is. And so whether it's our kids, our spouse, our friends, our neighbors, our coworkers, the guys that we're at the club with, they're watching. They're watching, and they want to. The question they're asking in the back of their mind is it real? Is it real? Show me. Don't talk about it. Don't sing about it. Don't go on, the TV and radio. Just show me. Is it real? Show me what it's like when Jesus sells cars. Show me what it's like when Jesus is a teacher. Show me what it's like when Jesus is a dad or a husband or a friend. Just show me. So where does it start? Revival starts with me. And every single day waking up and say, Jesus, I surrender to you. I want to follow you today and tomorrow. And then saying, okay, our society is enamored with numbers, right? And it's bigger and better. And whatever, whether that's in business or education or government, but especially the church. And we think that, I'm only making a difference if I have so many people coming to my church or to my Bible study, or that I'm sharing my faith so many times, or whatever it is. But I think we need to change the scorecard. Well, as we change the scorecard, we change society. And the scorecard is not by how many people are coming to my church, or how many people I'm talking to. The scorecard is how many disciples am I making? And
Mm,
again, just find a few people that you can begin to meet with. Jesus was never concerned with numbers. He was only concerned with the 12. It tells us in John that many of the disciples left him. They just walked away when it got hard. And so not everyone's going to stick with you, pastor. It's okay. Or small group leader. Just find that core group and just begin to invest in them. And take your time. It might be 1 year, it might be 2 years. And then as they're ready, you're going to release them to do for someone else what you did for them. And does this happen overnight? No. But over time, I look back 35 years now, and I can look back literally 14 generations of leaders from that first groups that I led with a couple with 12 guys, and it just has gone on, and it's just exponential, and that's what we want to see happen. Is over time to be able to look in the rearview mirror and see the changes that have happened in people's lives and in their families and in their kids and in their marriages and in their workplaces and in their communities with the teams that they coached or whatever it is. So when I look at society, it can be overwhelming.
mhm.
But the point is that God has always used one person to do an extraordinary work.
Yeah.
That's the history of the Bible. It's the history of society. All right. Father Ted Hesburgh, president of Notre Dame for 35 years, he said, our greatest heresy is the belief that one person can't make a difference.
Hmm.
And yet the Bible says we can.
Yeah.
In Acts chapter 4, verse 13, it says they looked at him, and they were like, they were unschooled. They were ordinary, but they could tell they had been with Jesus. And Dean, what gets me excited is just looking at all the guys in our churches that watch the leadership gathering, the summit, that are involved in small groups. If just all of those guys would begin to catch a vision of multiplication, of taking what they've been given and pass it on to the next generation, we can see some pretty cool stuff happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
Yeah.
We can get so caught up and frustrated and discouraged by what we see
Mhm.
going on around us. And
Yeah.
your country will be in an election cycle, or it is an election cycle,
Mhm.
and ours will be not shortly thereafter.
Yeah.
But I love looking beyond the kingdoms of this world to the kingdom of God and seeing what He is doing. And it's always the mustard seed. It's always the individual. I've been challenged recently with the Micah 6:8 passage.
Mhm.
Again, it's just a beautiful model of
Mhm.
discipleship for guys to act
Mhm.
justly, love mercy, and walk humbly. Like that changes culture. That
Mhm.
changes
It sure does.
homes and communities and literally the world. And I think God's calling us back there. So
Mhm.
thanks for sharing that and encouraging us, because we can feel discouraged in this kind of season we're in, but I think there's all kinds of hope and possibility if we lean into what God's told us to do.
Mhm. Mhm.
What's in the next season for No Regrets, and where are you hopeful for what God is going to do through the ministry there?
Yeah, our next season is as we continue to move forward is these first 5 years we've sort of been laying the foundation and the base, and I really think that you need to do that as a startup, but now as we're starting to get the right people on the bus and in the right seats, it's for us now to just continue to work with churches. And we're developing more trainers because we have more churches now that want to develop a disciple making culture, and so it's multiplying teachers, and so it's sort of taking what we're teaching and doing it ourselves, making sure that our trainers have an apprentice and that they're training others to train churches and things like that. We're right in the process. We had our first meeting this morning. We're getting some regional champions, and we have some places around the upper Midwest where we have a high density of churches that we're connected with. And so we're getting men at about 8 to 10 hours a week. So it's, maybe a semi-retired or retired guy that will, in, let's say, upper Wisconsin, north central Wisconsin, he'll take the 30 churches that we're connected with there and just start meeting with those leaders, those men's leaders, and just pray with them, shepherd them, care for them, build a network up in that area. And then the Fox Valley, Minneapolis, Chicago, Lehigh Valley, St. Louis, Nashville. We're just starting to identify. We have 6 right now. We want to just continue to grow that. And then we're doing the very same thing overseas. We're developing regional champions that are going to be, with us, that will, work in Zambia, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, and just say we're going to help churches, and we can provide training for churches and leaders right there, so we don't have to go back and forth across the ocean. That's just not financially, sustainable. But if
Hmm.
we help catch some guys catch a vision
Yeah.
in that part of the world, who lives there and knows the culture, is a person of peace, is an influencer, then we're just gonna, again, we're gonna encourage them and mobilize them and encourage, equip him to do that. And so we're doing it here, in upper Midwest where we are, but then also Sub-Sahara and Africa and India. So I think as we look to the future, it's just continuing to equip more leaders to equip leaders.
That's exciting, and so similar to what the conversation I was in this morning,
Yeah.
as we look coast to coast in our country, building networks and champions across the country and beyond as well. It is exciting when you step back and see what God is actually doing,
Yeah.
and I think the future is really bright. No matter how dark the world gets, the
Yes.
future that God has prepared for us is incredibly bright and hopeful.
Yeah.
Last question for you, or maybe a challenge I'd like you to throw to the men's leader or the guy out there who has feels a burden to start something in his local church, maybe a pastor. How would you encourage them today, either to begin or keep going in what they're doing?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. Well, first of all, if you're already going and you got something going, I'd say keep going. And but the big challenge is don't do it alone. We
Mm.
know over the last number of years that one of the main reasons that men's ministries to men stop in a church is because it's just one guy that has a vision, that has a passion. He goes to a conference or he reads a book, he gets excited, starts doing something, and then, it just becomes too much. So if you're already doing something, my challenge to you would be is to get some other guys around you. So whether you're associate pastor, senior pastor, or just a high capacity volunteer, build a leadership team. Don't do it by yourself. That'd be my challenge there. And then really look at, if you're doing it together, to move from event based to relationship based discipleship. That would be my challenge for the guys who already have something going. For the pastor, the leader who's saying, you know what, man, this is interesting. We don't have anything, and I think I want to do something, and I think there's something here. I would say, number one, contact the guys at Impactus. I mean, go to their website. They have a plethora of resources and materials. They have courses that you can go through to get started, and their field staff would love to come alongside of you and to help you to develop a plan and to get started. So I would say I would just point them to your website and to your ministry, and I feel so confident in it. I just love working with you, Dean. And then obviously you can also go to our website, No Regrets Men, and learn more about the training and the resources that we have as well. But we're partners in this, Impactus and us, and so we're doing very similar things, and so either one of us would be able to come alongside of you. And I will tell you this, it will change the trajectory of your life, of your church, of your small group. It truly will. And so I just encourage you to do that.
Oh, thanks for that, Steve. Thanks for that plug. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
was going to actually reciprocate that, but you've shared, like, I point guys to some of the tools and resources that you guys have. You've got some incredible history, knowledge, experience, and a great heart to see just the church flourish and men come alive in Christ to be all that God's called them to be. Give us your website again, and where can men find out more about No Regrets?
Yeah, so it's noregretsmen.org, and then also noregretsconference.org. We actually have 2 websites. One is just for the conference, and so if you're interested in maybe being a host site this year for the conference in February, you'll get all the information on what it means to be a host site and how to sign up to be a host site at your church. Or if you say, you know what, I just want to be a small group, I'm going to invite 3 or 4 or 5 guys into my home. or into the dorm or into the prison or into my, wherever you are, into your church, and just do a small group to start. All the information is on the conference website as well, noregretsconference.org. And so you can learn how to host it at a church or in a small group in your home, wherever. If you want information on ministry to men and discipleship, that would be noregretsmen.org.
Wonderful. Steve, thank you so much for being with us. It is always a delight. And I'm inspired just hearing what you shared with us. For those of you that haven't checked out the summit, make sure you go to our website and check out all of the talks from the summit, including Steve's. You'll be inspired to really minister to the men in your church and your community. And again, I just want to say, Steve, thanks for all you do. Thanks for who you are in being such a force for the kingdom and for ministry to men. I just thank you so much. And it's a privilege to know you and work with you as well. So thank you for being with us on the podcast today.
A real joy. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Impactus podcast. To learn more about living a life of purpose and godly impact, check out impactus.org.